Hello everyone and welcome to what was probably the best game played yesterday in the Masters section of the Tata Steel 2026. It is Hans Niemann versus Nodirbek Abdusattorov. Two heavyweights, two players who are doing incredibly well in the tournament. Both are without a single loss, and two players that we're definitely going to miss in the candidates tournament in 2 months. I think both of them would do really well and they would make the event a lot more interesting. But only eight fit in, and you have to do really well in some of the events, or fit some criteria in order to qualify. So, like I said, there were many interesting games yesterday, and we're gonna cover more. But this one is just so special because at many points in the game, you only had one move that keeps your game going. Otherwise, you're just dead lost. And we're gonna cover, of course, many of these moments. This is a classical game. So going into this one, Hans started off in round one by beating Vladimir Fedosev, then two draws against Matthias Blubaum and Jauskan Nerdomush, and then a draw versus Aravind Chitambaram, whereas Nodirbek started off with a draw against Jauskan, then a victory versus Pragnananda, then a draw against Aravind, and then a victory in the previous round against Van Vin. And Nodirbek played against Van Vin's Petrov defense, and interestingly, here he employs the Petrov against Hans, but Hans deviates from the game that Nodirbek played in the previous round against Win. So let's check it out. And for those of you who are saying this is an old photo of Hans, that he shaved his head, and I should use new photos. I never update a photo unless I have a really good one. So, for example, I was using Daniil Dubov's photo from 2021 all the way up to 2025 because there just wasn't a good photo of him prior to that. So, then I updated it. And when I get a new nice photo of Hans, I will update this one as well. So let's check it out. Hans with white opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5, knight f3, and knight to f6. As promised, the Petrov defense is on the board. Knight captures on d5 and pawn to d6. So same as in the game against Van Win. d6, knight f3, and knight captures on e4. We have pawn to d4, pawn to d5, and bishop to d3, the classical attack against the Petrov. So everything the same. But here, Win played bishop to e7 against Nodirbek, whereas Nodirbek goes for knight to c6. This is the most played move, and I mentioned that in my coverage of the game Nodirbek versus Van Win. This is the main line of the classical attack against the Petrov. We have castles kingside, bishop to e7, rook to e1, and bishop to g4. So still all top moves. No one is deviating from anything here. c4, knight back to f6, and c captures on d5. And knight captures on d5 is a bit more popular, but here Nodirbek includes bishop captures on f3, queen captures and queen captures on d5, and we have queens coming off the board. Queen captures, knight captures, and knight to c3. And still a very, very popular position. Castle's queenside is by far the most popular move for black here, but Nodirbek declines this as he doesn't want to trade knights. He goes knight d to b4. And now we're already entering some very rare territory. This is an old line that was played in the 90s. We have bishop to e4, now controlling that knight on b4, also putting pressure on this diagonal. Knight captures on d4 and bishop to e3. Okay, so what is the idea here? It seems that one of the knights can definitely come to c2. So if you do that, let's say you bring the knight to c2, the idea is pawn to a3, believe it or not. And now once you capture the rook, you're going to play a captures on b4 with your knight hanging. And if you play knight to b3, then bishop captures on b7 is extremely annoying. For example, rook b8, bishop to c6 with check, king f8, knight to d5. And this is just very, very bad for black. Probably, in the hands of Hans, this would be winning. So that's why, of course, he ignores the threat on c2, plays pawn to c5. This is the best way to handle it. Or you can go rook to d8, also not terrible. It's important to defend the knight on d4. And you could play bishop captures on b7, but here we have bishop captures on d4. Now, bishop captures on b7 is fine, and it was actually played in a top-tier game in 1984 in Bugoyno. Alexander Belyavsky played it against Jan Timan, and that game ended in a draw. But here we have bishop captures on d4, and it is now, as of move 16, that we have a completely new game. So up to this point, they were following known theory. C captures on d4, and now knight to b5. Okay, putting pressure on c7. Interestingly, there is one or two moves that don't lose the game for black here. And Nodirbek actually spent 20 minutes here because you really have to calculate a lot, and that's what makes this game so incredible. So like the queens are off the board, we traded even more material, but stuff is happening, and Hans is already below 1 hour on his clock, whereas Nodirbek is almost up on full time. But he spends 20 minutes here as he has to dodge this knight c7 check somehow, and you can't really do it by castling. Castling seems like such a nice idea, but for example, a3 attacks the knight, you move the knight, the bishop captures on c6, and all of a sudden that bishop on e7 is undefended. So you have to take all of this into consideration. You have to cover this, you have to cover that. So Nodirbek plays king to f8. And that gets the job done. It's by far the top best move recommended by the engine. I will also show a really complicated line just for your viewing pleasure, as today is a rest day, so we can, rest while enjoying complicated lines. What's the idea here? Okay, you defend this, you no longer have to worry about knight c7, and you give up the a7 pawn. Well, now d3. And all of a sudden, this is a very different game. For example, rook a to d1, you will castle kingside. And now, no worries, nothing is on a light square, so this bishop can't really move with tempo. You can capture a pawn and then trade, but trading isn't really working for you with that pawn already on d3. So let's say a3, knight to c2, attacks the rook. Now you will kind of trade because you have to captures, rook captures on e7, rook f to e8, and let's say after captures and captures, you cannot capture the pawn because of mate on e1. So you have to free up some squares for your king, either g, h, or f pawn, doesn't really matter. Rook d8, and you keep this up. Black is down a pawn, but that pawn on d3 is quite amazing, and white has to be very, very careful not to lose this game. For example, knight e3 is already winning for black unless you stop it with king f2, and this game is full of such unique ideas. But okay, 20 minutes was enough for Nodirbek to avoid that line completely. He decided to go king to f8, which is objectively best. Rook a to d1, and now the question is, why is Hans giving up a pawn? Well, he's giving up a pawn because if you capture it, then rook captures on d4, and now if bishop to f6 seems like a really good move, rook d7. And this is lost for black. It doesn't really matter what you do. You can capture here, but then bishop d5 goes after f7. The other rook is coming to e7. The knight is coming to c7 to stop the rook from coming to e8. So this is dead lost for black. So Nodirbek just plays bishop to f6. He defends the pawn. Well, not really. You can capture it if you want, and Hans does so. Knight captures on d4, and now rook to d8, just activating as quickly as possible. He does not want to be up a pawn. Knight to b5 by Hans, again going after a7, and here we have rook captures on d1, rook captures, and now king to e7. Interestingly, a6 here can be played, but then you get something like knight to d6, you put pressure on b7, and then if you trade knight captures on a2, you can even go bishop d5, and this is now, not that spectacular. So that's why king to e7, it's important to get that rook into the game, and now Hans just goes back, rook e1. It's plenty of time to win the pawn, let's pressure that king. And here, Nodirbek just played bishop captures on b2, and he's saying, you have no good discoveries. Whatever you play, I mean, you can capture that pawn on b7, but I was planning on getting my king to f6, one way or another. So you forcing me to do it really works for me. Hans goes rook to e2. He attacks Nodirbek's bishop on b2, bishop c1, and rook e1. We have bishop to d2, rook e2, and now, believe it or not, there's only one move that keeps Nodirbek in the game. Otherwise, he's just lost, and for the trickiest reason possible. The move is bishop to c1. You have to play it. And to give you an idea, let's say you play bishop to f4. Do you see how white wins? It's the oldest trick in the book. So white wins just by playing a3. And the bishop on e4 controls the knight. There is no square that knight can go to. And that's pretty much it. You can go to a6, but that's really, just bishop captures on b7, opens up a discovery, and that's kind of the whole point. While the knight is on b4, it's on a dark square, so a discovery does not do anything for you. You have to get the knight to a light square. And where's the only square the knight can go from a dark square? On a light square. So you attack it, a3, and there's nothing that you can do here. Even if you play a6, white will just bring back the knight, knight c3, and now you have to move the knight, and then wherever you go, the bishop just opens up a discovery and picks up that knight. So that's the idea. So bishop to c1 is the only defense for Nodirbek. but still you have to be incredibly precise. We have pawn to a3, attacking the knight, and now pawn to a6. That's key, attacking the defender of the a3 pawn. And now if you just move that knight, knight c3, you capture on a3, and the knight remains on a dark square. So bishop to b1, opening up a discovery, we have king to f6. And this must be played. Again, to give you an example, if you go king d7, you again can force the king to an unfavorable square, because now both knights are hanging, and your key is to get this knight away with check. So you're going to play bishop to f5 check, king c6, and knight a7 check. King b6, knight to c8 with check, the knight is defended, and next move you win the knight on b4. So, yeah, really crazy stuff, but it is what these guys were calculating. I mean, Hans is already below the 10-minute mark, and Nodirbek almost a full hour on the clock, and they have to make 13 more moves to reach time control. So, king f6 by Nodirbek, and now knight to d6. With ideas of after the knight moves, maybe you can pressure that f7 pawn. So, knight c6 and pawn to h4. You also have to limit the movement of the black king, but also give your own king some squares so it can get into the game. Bishop captures on a3, and now we have knight to e8 with check. And look at this, it's like the famous Paul Morphy mate, but it's not a mate, because the pawn covers g5, the bishop covers f5 and g6, the rook covers all of the squares, so the king has no squares. You have to capture the knight. So Hans wins the exchange, but Nodirbek has two connected pass pawns on the queen side. And this is... I mean, with 6 minutes on the clock, this I can't even imagine how scary, it was to play this. Nodirbek goes b6. He wants to have his pawns on dark square, so the bishop on c5 can just cover everything. We have rook to c8, attacking the knight, knight e5, and pawn to f4. Bishop to c5 with check, and now king to f1. And here we have knight to g4. Rook to c6 check. Hans goes after the black king. We have king e7 and rook to c7 check. And the idea is that if you go king e8, then look at this tricky move, bishop a2. And you can't really defend that. If you go knight to h6, then just rook a7. And after a5, nothing can move here. You cannot move b5 or a4. This is all covered. Otherwise, you're just going to lose material. The knight can't really move because it defends the f7 pawn. The f7 pawn cannot move because you lose the g7 pawn. So black is completely tied up here, and white will just win this game. So after rook c7, king to f6 was played, the only good square for Nodirbek's king, and now rook c6 check, king e7, rook c7 check, king to f6. Now probably if you play it one more time, it's going to be a threefold repetition, and the game will be proclaimed a draw. Bishop to a2, and everyone thought that Hans was going to do it because those two connected pass pawns are incredibly scary, and Hans is below 2 minutes on the clock, but he doesn't care. He just plays bishop a2, goes after rook captures on f7, knight to e3 with check, and now king to e2. This is move 40 for Hans, so of course he played it, but king to g1 seems to also be very, very interesting and possible, getting your king into the game this way. Because it seems like you blundered the rook because there's a discovery, but no, just rook captures on c5, and now you pick up the knight, so you don't have to run away. But okay, move 40 has to be played, time control has been reached for Hans. King e2, and now knight captures on g2. We have rook captures on f7, king to g6, and now f5 with check, king h6, and king to f3. Hans wants to box Nodirbek's king all the way on h6. He's giving up a pawn to do it, and he wants checkmate. Knight captures on h4, and now the question is what to play here. King to g4 seems like such an automatic move. But the problem is, if you play king g4, then knight g2, and you don't really have a good way of exploiting this. You don't have a check or anything. If you prepare it, for example, you want something like this. Then look at this. Knight e3 check wins the pawn. You cannot go to g5, and if you go to f4, then knight to d5 check gets the job done. And here it seems like what gets the job done? We can just capture that knight, but bishop to d6 check picks up the rook. So that's the problem. So after knight captures on h4, Hans doesn't go to g4. He actually goes to g3. And now we have king to h5. g4 is better because it prevents king h5, but you don't really have a lot to work with. And now the problem is you do not get the capture here because knight captures on f5 forks the rook and the king. So pawn to f6 by Hans. G captures, and now rook captures on h7 with check. King g5, you have to defend that knight. And interestingly, you can capture on h4, but then bishop to f2 check. Captures and captures, and bishop versus 3 pawns. This is a draw. Interestingly, only black can win this because you cannot win with, just a bishop and a king. So, okay, after king g5, rook g7 check, we have king to h6, and now rook to a7. And believe it or not, it was in this position on move 48 that Hans Niemann and Nodirbek Abdusattorov agreed to a draw, as there is nothing more to be done here. Now, some were saying that, okay, of course they agreed to a draw because those two connected pass pawns are very, very scary. The thing is, there's no way to make progress here. And I will just show you why. Let's hypothetically continue this game. Let's say knight f5 check because the knight is hanging and also the a6 pawn is hanging. You will attack the knight, king f4, and now after knight e7, you will capture the pawn. Okay, no problems there. But now, look at this, pawn to f5, and this is unbreakable. Let's throw in a few more moves. Let's say you play bishop b1, you attack the pawn. Let's say king g6, we defend the pawn. The pawn defends the bishop defends the knight defends the f5 pawn, and the king defends the f5 pawn. So there is absolutely nothing you can do here as white. You can only lose this game as white, but still it's very hard to make a move here with black. As soon as you weaken something, white will just go after it. And it seems like, okay, we're attacking f5 twice. Can't we just get this rook all the way to e5 or g5 and attack it the third time, win it, and then just win the game? No, there's a problem because these are dark squares. And now let's say you go rook a2, king f6, and now what do you play? You go rook e2 or rook g2, doesn't really matter. Let's say you go rook g2. Let's say black even makes a silly move just to allow you to get your rook there as soon as possible. Rook g5, bishop d5, bishop d2 check, wins the rook. And it doesn't really matter if you go here or if you go here, because there you will also be able just to skewer that rook with bishop to d6. So rook will never touch e5 or g5, and with that in mind, there's really nothing you can do here. So yeah, really, really strong game, incredible performance. Hans really gave his all, burned all of his time to try and present the problems for Nodirbek, but Nodirbek solved all of them. And I mean, you've seen, these were only some of the problems that I've thrown at you. There were many more, of course, they had to solve. It could easily be a 40-minute video. But yeah, incredible stuff by the two leaders. And I will now show the standings in case you haven't seen any of the previous videos. These are the standings after 5 rounds have been played. The leaders, Hans Nodirbek and Javokir Sindarov, with 3 points. We have Jordan Pamfores, Vladimir Fedoseev, Gukesh Domaraju with 2.5 points. Matthias Blöbaum, Arjun Erigaisi, Vincent Keimer with 2 points. Jaus Kanner Domush had a bit of a fluke there. With 1.5 point, Pragnananda Anish Giri win, and Aravind Chittambaram. So yeah, really, really interesting event. We're gonna cover at least one more round from the one more game from the Masters from round 5, and then we'll just enjoy our rest day and go into round 6 ready for it. But yeah, incredible chess being played here, and makes me very, very happy. So yeah, that's the game. Really hope you guys enjoyed it. The incredible stuff by Hans and Nodirbek. Like I said, we'll definitely miss them in the candidates tournament. I would like to thank Simon Hugo Remjin, William Gould, Bremwan Ginniken, Gary Jackway, and Eric Stur for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions, but mostly covering the Tata Steel until it finishes. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.